Good morning, everyone. Hi, this is Richard Eidlin with Business for America. Thanks so much for joining us this morning to participate in our webinar on the Time to Vote initiative. And Time to Vote is an effort that Patagonia, PayPal, and Levi started in 2018, designed to have companies encourage their employees to vote in the national election. And today we have great examples, 4 great examples of companies that are participating in Time to Vote. And we're going to learn about how they've operationalized that program, some of the challenges they've faced. So our companies this morning include Patagonia, WS Badger, Timberland, and Seventh Generation. And we're really excited to have them all with us today. One of the other issues we want to concentrate on this morning is how people are voting. And as you've been watching and reading, the likelihood that more and more folks will vote by mail come November is growing exponentially. Unfortunately, however, as you've probably have already seen, a number of states have been experiencing problems with their election systems. First, we saw in Wisconsin in April, people standing in lines for hours, possibly exposing themselves to the COVID-19 virus. And then yesterday in Georgia, many polling stations did not have adequate equipment, and there were many other difficulties and irregularities. So one of the other topics we want to focus here on today is how businesses can support states taking more aggressive steps to allow people to vote by mail. So we're going to be getting into that, plus the Time to Vote initiative. And before we get going, I wanted to thank both New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility and Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility so much for their help in promoting this webinar. So our first speaker is JJ Huggins from Patagonia, and we've been working closely with Patagonia and JJ over the past half a year on both the Time to Vote initiative as well as the Vote by Mail campaign. So JJ, thanks so much for being with us this morning, and give us a sense of how Time to Vote was developed and how it's succeeding in attracting hundreds and hundreds of companies, and where you see it going for the 2020 election.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Business for America, for being such a valuable partner with Time to Vote and helping us recruit companies, and now leading this whole effort with Vote by Mail and all the election protection efforts that we're glad to be a part of. And thank you everyone for being on this call. I live in California now where Patagonia is based, but I grew up in Massachusetts. And so New Hampshire and Vermont those are my playgrounds growing up. And that's where I went to do a lot of the outdoor sports that I still do today. And one of the reasons why I work at Patagonia. So thank you for being there. Time to Vote really began, its early days go back to 2016 when Patagonia internally decided to close all of its stores, offices, its distribution center. Everything in the US was closed for Patagonia on election day in 2016 for the general election. And our CEO made the decision to shut down and send the message to our employees, and also our customers and our communities, that there was nothing more important than voting on election day. It was this internal program to really just make accommodations for our staff to get out and vote, but it sent a message to the broader community. And that went over incredibly well internally. And the CEO got a lot of notes from employees saying, if you didn't do this, I would have had a really hard time getting to the polls. We have stores all over the country. Think of people who work in New York City, who work retail, who might not make a ton of money, and they might have a long commute and have to change trains a couple of times. Having the day off, a paid day off, made it really easy for folks to get to the polls and cast their ballot. And then a lot of us did other things, did volunteer projects and so forth on that day. In 2018, Patagonia decided that we wanted to scale that program beyond our community, beyond our stores and offices, and try to create a movement around the country involving the business sector. And that's when we formalized this program called Time to Vote. We joined up with Levi's and PayPal as the founding members of Time to Vote. And the idea was that we would try to recruit companies where we had friends. So a lot of the companies, early companies, were kind of retail or financial companies, creative services agencies, and so forth, who joined up in Time to Vote. We thought we might get a few dozen companies, and it would be this sort of feel good initiative to help our employees and drive a little bit of voter turnout. We ended up getting 411 companies enrolled in 2018, which blew all of our expectations out of the water. We got a ton of media coverage in the run up to the midterms that year when the media started doing all these stories about voter turnout. And they were looking at this time to vote effort and all this work the business community was doing to help their employees. And we saw that this was a really popular program and that it was very much needed. There's a lot of groups out there working on get out the vote, but Time to Vote is so specific to the business community and it's so simple. We just ask our companies to commit to giving their employees time to vote in the election. You don't have to close your stores and your offices for the whole day like Patagonia does. You can if you want to, but most companies in Time to Vote just commit to giving their employees about 2 to 3 hours of paid time off on election day. We went into this year, 2020, with the goal of enlisting 1,000 companies in Time to Vote. We've been working very closely with Business for America to attempt to get to that goal. We got some press in February and we were seeing a lot of momentum, and then COVID-19 came to the US and we were thrown this very difficult curveball. And we kind of had to lay low for about a month while we all individually, all the companies had to regroup and deal with their own crisis situation within their business. And now we're getting to a space where we're publicly relaunching Time to Vote and re-engaging with this goal of trying to enlist 1,000 companies. We have 470 companies as of today. And we've also pivoted, and we understand that it's really difficult to talk for employers to talk to their employees and their communities about giving people time off at a time when so many companies have furloughed workers and the economy is really shaky. So we've pivoted to looking at how we can help with vote by mail, how we can help with election protection in terms of supporting the polling precincts this fall. And so we're using this network of 470 amazing companies that we have so far to look at the resources we have to help. We are still trying to recruit new companies to Time to Vote, and we're going to be working with BFA to provide our member companies with a menu of options for how they can support locally to make sure this election happens this fall. And then I'll end with, most recently, in the last week and a half or so, we've seen so much civic engagement around the country after the killing of George Floyd. And we feel that this work is even more important because we need to protect the rights of Black and Brown communities to cast their votes this fall. And a lot of those people are our employees. And that just keeps breathing new energy into this program. So I thank you all for being here and listening today.
Great. JJ, let me ask you just a quick follow-up question, which is about the nonpartisan nature of this. You know, given that Patagonia, Levi Strauss, and other quote unquote progressive companies are involved, one might have the impression that this is some, you know, an effort to just mobilize the left. So is there any merit to that?
I can see why somebody would think that. And Patagonia will have an environmental campaign that we're launching that is going to be very political. We're going to launch in a couple of months. And we are going to be involved on the partisan side of the election. Time to Vote is in a separate lane from that. Mm-hmm. And we are very careful to keep Time to Vote nonpartisan. And we have purposefully recruited companies such as Walmart, Target, Best Buy, JP Morgan Chase and Company, companies that represent hundreds of thousands of employees around the country and represent a diverse workforce and a diverse range of political opinions. And we've gone out of our way to solicit those companies because we want to ensure that this truly is nonpartisan. And even if the CEOs of some of those companies are fairly liberal and outspoken, you have to imagine their workforce, which is JP Morgan Chase and Company has, I think, 300 or 250,000 employees. Many of them work on, Wall Street and the financial services sector. Those people are going to represent a wide range of political views, and they're not going to vote for the same candidates that the majority of Patagonia employees are going to vote for, and we're
Right.
fine with that.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And, and Walmart and Target and Dick's Sporting Goods are also active in Time to Vote. So I think it has proven to be a nonpartisan initiative. So good. Thank you. And we'll circle back there, JJ. So let me introduce our next speaker, Atlanta McIlwraith. And Atlanta is with Timberland in New Hampshire, in Stratham, New Hampshire. And Atlanta is a senior manager of community engagement and communications with the company. And Timberland has participated in this program for a number of years. So we're interested to hear, Atlanta, sort of how the initial decision was made to get involved, and then how the program has been received, and maybe how it's evolved over time.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me, Richard, and for giving me this opportunity to share about our experience with Time to Vote. I work for Timberland. As Richard mentioned, we make boots and shoes and clothes and gear. We're based in New Hampshire, but we do have a footprint around the country through our stores and distribution centers. And when the invitation came to participate in Time to Vote, frankly, it seemed like a no-brainer to us. We had basically been offering employees time to vote, since before I got to the company. I've been there 15 years. Because in part, we have a very strong commitment to corporate social responsibility. We talk about that in terms of better product, greener world, and stronger communities. And the community piece has been really important to Timberland for a long time. So in 1992, we offered our employees paid time to volunteer in the community. And that really built a culture of community-focused service for us and began that process. And at the time, we had a CEO who felt that the strongest commitment we could really make to community was to get everyone engaged in voting. And because we have the privilege of being based in New Hampshire and having the first in the nation primary, since 2000, if not before, we started inviting primary candidates to come and speak to our employees. Both parties, we invite everybody who's a candidate pretty much to come. And so we'd been having these large gatherings, town halls, sometimes 2 or 3 in a week, if it's the week before the primary, when everyone wants to be your best friend. And so it just was a really big part of Timberland culture. And over the past few years, what we've done is, in addition to inviting candidates and having them come and address our workforce, we also share before Election Day nonpartisan resources like votesmart.org, where people can just get a basic understanding of where whatever candidate feels on whatever issue. We send out resources a week ahead of Election Day, reminding people that it's coming up and that they have time to vote. And basically, all through the years, you just had spoken to your manager about needing time to vote, and it was just understood in general that you could have that. So Time to Vote, when the invitation to join the campaign came through to us, it just seemed obviously like a natural fit and just gave us sort of a name to call it. We hadn't necessarily given it a name before. I checked in with our distribution centers just to see if they've had any hurdles to implementing it. And They said not at all, in part because it has been such a big part of Timberland culture for so many years. But they said it is just a rule. You talk to your manager, and the manager you work it out with your manager when you're going, and you're allowed 2 to 3 hours to get out and vote, and it is universally supported there. So it hasn't really created any hiccups for us. It's just been a way to spread the word more broadly, lend our voice to this effort to get more companies to allow their employees time to vote. And it's been basically a communication opportunity for us. But sort of making sure we really want our employees to be informed voters. And so that's why we share these nonpartisan resources with them to make sure that we're not seen to be affiliated with any particular party. We just want people to express their voice.
And at Atlanta, given that New Hampshire, is a competitive political environment, so you have, lots of independents, Republicans, Democrats. What impact has encouraging people to vote had in the workplace? Do people tend to be more active, conversational, engaged, or more contentious? Sort of what are you seeing?
Yes, I mean, there are, after 2016, the sort of surprising results of the 2016 election, which were a surprise to many of us. Yes, we did start to see, obviously, people felt very strongly about those campaign results one way or another. And we as a company didn't really have to interject and say anything because for the most part, people are professional. Now, on my team, for instance, something did come up with an employee having bumper stickers, posted in her cube of the candidate she supported, and another employee said she found that offensive. And so, we just sort of worked that out with just agreeing that we were not going to have any active signage in the workplace for our team. We haven't had to make a blanket statement throughout the company about that. Mm-hmm. But yes, I mean, it is, a divided state. So I think but in general, what I hear is from people when I send out the invitations about so-and-so candidates coming, and, one time, obviously, we had a number of, we invite everybody, but sometimes not everybody comes. So sometimes I get complaints about, we're hearing a lot from the Democrats. What about the Republicans? But my response is, we invite them all. If you've got a candidate and a connection, help us bring them in, because we want to get as many points of view in the office as possible.
Right. Okay.
So in general, it hasn't been a problem.
Good. So we're going to circle back to that that dynamic, because I think it occurs in lots of different companies. But I think, for me, Atlanta, the major takeaway from talking, to you over the months about Timberland's program is there seems to be a real sense of obligation, responsibility to engage your employees in the places they work and wanting to encourage them to have a voice. Is that a good summary? Absolutely. Okay, great, good. So our next speaker is Rebecca Hamilton, who's the co-CEO of SW Badger, which is in Gilsum, New Hampshire. And Badger has been active in Time to Vote also. And Rebecca, tell us about how you've been operationalizing the program there, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. So Badger, also being in New Hampshire, if you're not familiar with it, is just an incredibly active state, because being a swing state, being first in the nation for the primaries, we're one of the few places where everyone in a 700-person village can expect that every candidate will come visit them before they vote. You don't get that very many other places in the country. And so I think that it's a combination of being in that climate and then also being a mission-driven company and recognizing the value of supporting our employees and having a voice and supporting the democratic system and the difference it makes depending on who gets elected, and wanting to make sure that we're doing our part in in getting the vote out. And so at Badger, we've been offering paid time off for our employees for as long as I can remember, although in the last few years, we've kind of upped the ante a bit. And so in last year, what we did was we offered a full paid day off for either voting or volunteering at the polls, volunteering to help drive people to the polls, or whatever employees wanted to do that actively was part of the voting process. And we had some additional volunteer days that they could use as well if they wanted to work throughout the entire week. And that would all be paid time. Leading up to the primaries or the regular elections, we have a few different things that we've been doing. So in the last year, we implemented a vetting process to bring candidates into Badger. And so while we're nonpartisan as a company, being a strongly mission-driven company that focuses on environmentalism, we did want to have a little bit of a eligibility criteria. And so we vet our candidates that we invite here using the League of Conservative Conservation Voters Scorecard and the American Progress list of climate deniers, and kind of make sure that the candidates kind of meet a baseline of mission alignment for their environmental actions. It doesn't matter which party they're from, but we want to know that they're going to be somewhat in alignment with our mission. And then if they meet that kind of baseline, then we would invite them to come be here at Badger. And we've also worked with other organizations. This year, we're partnering with Protect Our Winters to host an event. We'll see what happens with the pandemic, but we were hoping to host an event here, bringing kind of some of the strongest climate activist candidates out here to Badger and open that up to our community. And then the other thing that we've been really focused on is providing resources for our employees. Again, nonpartisan, just information, education, generally supporting our employees in engaging in the democratic process, whatever that might look like. And Badger, as a company, we have about 100 employees. We're a manufacturer, B Corp. We make sunscreen, organic skincare products. And like I said, we're largely focused on our environmental mission, but also social mission. So we get involved with policy, but when it comes to elections, we're nonpartisan.
Right, good. Rebecca, you know, I'm really struck and also by what Atlanta said about the role that companies, and particularly executives, can play in sort of legitimizing the importance of voting or encouraging people to take their civic responsibility more seriously. And you know, if one looks at the voter turnout in the United States, it's disappointingly low compared to other advanced industrial economies and other democracies. So are you finding that, you know, as the co-CEO of Badger, that people look to you to, you know, give them some direction, not on who to vote for, but rather the importance of voting?
You know, that's a good question. I wouldn't say that people necessarily look directly to me, but we've created a culture where voting is important throughout the company. Mm-hmm. And so in the Badger culture, everyone, I don't know that I'd say they're expected to vote, but it's talked about so much that it's very much, you know, on voting day, it's a conversation around Badger of, did you get to go vote? Who's gone to vote yet? When are you going to go? And so I think that we've been part of creating a culture where they know that they're supported in going out to vote. They know that all of their peers are going out to vote, that the leadership team is going out to vote. No judgment if they choose not to, but we're going to do everything we can to support that.
Great. Okay, good. And JJ, I know you and I have spoken quite a bit, and I've heard you talk about trying to promote a cultural shift in the public and the workforce about taking voting more seriously. Do you want to add anything to Rebecca's thought about culture?
I'm just sitting here nodding my head because it makes, what Rebecca is saying makes so much sense. We've seen at Patagonia that our CEO has so much power to just lead the culture internally and also externally. And we're seeing a lot right now with everything that's happening in this country. our customers are demanding that we take a stand on social justice issues in a way that we've always been really active on environmental justice, and they're demanding that we step more into the social justice space. And it's this demand where it's coming from our customers and our employees. And it is amazing to see how much power CEOs have these days. It's really, I think we could all agree in the last few years, they've become even more powerful, where people are looking to CEOs to set the tone for the culture, to step up and lead in ways that we've never seen before. It's almost like they're becoming, there has to be almost sort of like elected officials in a way. And it just, everything Rebecca said makes so much sense, where they can really set the tone within their community and change the culture and lead.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think it's very much part of a broader trend about mission-driven companies or purpose-driven companies, you know, the emergence and growth of the B Corp community, and this adoption in many companies about a culture of participation and what we would call civic participation. Good. Let's turn to seventh generation, and Kate Ogden is with us. And Kate, thanks for representing Vermont there. And Kate is the Director of Advocacy and Movement Building, which is a great title. I love that, in seventh generation. And Kate, I think these questions about engaging in social justice issues, environmental justice issues, is something that's been near and dear to seventh generation's heart for a while. So tell us how, in your company, you are operationalizing the Time to Vote program.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. We have long been an activist company, and I think have always felt very strongly that we had an obligation, and that it was important for us to use our voice and leverage the influence that we have to create the social change that we want to see and need to see in the world. And so in many ways, voting is an obvious extension of that. We support our employees and we support the public in using their voice and standing up for the issues that they believe in. And voting is one of many ways to do that, but it's certainly a very powerful way for folks who are able to exercise that right. So I think, similar to some of the experiences I've heard shared here, our decision to join Time to Vote in many ways felt like a formalization of what was maybe kind of just an unofficial part of our culture. Our employees have always been encouraged to vote. It's always been made very clear that folks should take the flexibility that they need really in all areas of their life, whether that is, what they need to do, as a parent or a caretaker. We all have very full lives outside of work. And it's important. I think it's a part of our culture, and it's always been important that folks are able to live fully. And voting is a part of that, and it's a really critical part of that. We went into 2020 with a clear understanding that our advocacy focus for the last several years has been around climate justice. And so we really saw the 2020 election as a critical election in so many ways, but certainly for the climate. I mean, the leaders who are elected in this next election are going to hold power during what is really the last window of opportunity that we have to avoid the worst impacts of the climate crisis. They are going to be directing trillions of dollars worth of stimulus funds that will either, lock us into, an accelerating climate disaster, or will put us more fully on the path to a just transition. And certainly far beyond climate. I think that across the board, the issues and the values that we hold as a company, the election will have a tremendous impact on the progress that is made over the next several years. So we're sort of holding within our strategy that we want to help make voting safer for everyone. So we have been using our voice to advocate for safe voting practices nationally, and for states to get the funding that they need to be able to implement those practices. We are trying to figure out how we can do targeted product donations of disinfectant to polling places where there's likely to be a large population of folks who will need to vote in person. We are planning to partner with one of the youth-led climate organizations that we've been in relationship with over the past year to help increase the youth voter turnout. And then we're really directing a lot of our effort and our strategic communications to helping to increase the millennial voter turnout, because that's really sort of our core consumer demographic. And then of course, we need to look internally too. So we have a program at 7th Generation that's called LEAD, and it stands for Learn, Engage, Act, and Demonstrate. And we've built a lot of our 2020 LEAD sort of curriculum, if you will, around how we're helping our employees do everything from learn about the history of voter suppression and the importance of protecting the right to vote for everyone, to, you know, some of the ideas that we're pursuing is having someone from our local community sort of speak to all of the different sort of local, municipal and state level positions that are up for election, so that people understand why those local elections are so important and the impact that those positions have on our daily lives. It feels like a really live conversation right now in the midst of the protests that are happening. And also making sure that folks have access to information about, you know, how can you vote from home? How do you vote early? We're building right now a civic action center for our consumers to be public facing, but also very much for our own employees to use so that they can check to make sure they're registered. They know how they're going to vote. They can make a plan for that. They can sort of get all the information they need really easily. So we see it's sort of two sides of the same coin of how we're engaging our internal community and how we see it fitting into our advocacy strategy.
Great, Kate, thank you. That was extremely informative and impressive. Let me ask you, Kate, and then anyone else can weigh in here. You know, a question that I often hear is, who's responsible within the company for operationalizing time to vote and for pursuing these other initiatives that you described? So, you know, is it the CSR person? Is it someone in HR? And then the second part of the question is, how do you build a team to get behind this effort? So what has 7th Generation's experience been?
Yeah, I mean, you sort of noted my job title. I feel really lucky to work at a place that has an advocacy and movement building manager, and very lucky to hold that role. So in many ways, it's a really neat dovetail with the work that I feel very fortunate to lead at the company, but I've very closely partnered with our HR department. So when I sort of had the idea, like I would love for 7th Generation to formally vote time to vote, that my first move was to reach out to our HR department to make sure that we were fully aligned on that. And then, you know, I think that it's, you know, the LEAD program that I referenced, I think that you see programs like that more and more in companies where there's a sense of like, how are we sort of building a particular culture? How are we staying in touch with each other? And so, you know, I joke that sort of like I kind of brought my agenda to LEAD this year in volunteering to join that team. But it's been a really strong partnership for us to have a lot of cohesion on the internal and external.
Okay, yeah. And Rebecca, at Badger, who's responsible for running this program, and how much, you know, and how do they recruit others to support their work?
Well, similarly to Kate, we do engage our HR department if it's something internal and we want to implement that. Up until this past year, we had an internal sustainability green team that also supported the company in education and information around voting. And then our strategic team brings in new ideas, kind of any policies or things like that we'd be implementing. Go through the strategic team.
Okay, great. And you know, one thing that JJ has said a number of times and is really core to the Time to Vote initiative is that it's non-prescriptive. So there's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and companies design different initiatives, I think, as you've all articulated. So at Atlanta, when you think about Timberland's program, and again, it has some similar elements to Seventh Generation and Badger and Patagonia, but it's also unique. So as you have organized your program, have you learned from other companies and seen what maybe some of the best practices are and incorporated them into Timberland's approach?
Well, I'm learning some today. For instance,
Okay.
I love how Rebecca vets the candidates. I haven't, we don't do that, but the candidates, I would say, definitely get heavily grilled if they choose to come to Timberland on those issues that are important to the company around climate change, obviously. So, so in terms of before this, I'm trying to think. Generally, I have friends at Levi's. We all know we have colleagues at different brands, and we share sort of different things that we do and different approaches. But for the most part, I think we've been sort of moving forward and gleaning different bits of information as we go. And I can't think of a specific example in this moment, but
okay.
Yeah, but I love what I'm hearing today, and
Okay.
from both Kate and Rebecca and JJ.
Great. JJ, let me ask you, the application process, so, a company is interested in applying, they socialize it within the company, they find, the CEO is amenable to learning more. How does one actually go about applying and then getting accepted to become part of the Time to Vote initiative?
Thank you, Richard. You can go to maketimetovote.org. There's a tab on there that says join us. Click through that. There's a very simple form you fill out. That form you then submit the form, and it goes to us, meaning Patagonia, Levi's, and PayPal. And we work with a company called Countable, who manages the website, and they do the initial vetting. And then every week they send us a report showing all the companies who have applied within the last week. And they do an initial round of vetting, and then we do a secondary round of vetting. And when we're vetting, what we're doing is making sure that the people who applied have the authority to represent the company they say they represent. So we have a few methods for doing that. And that's to prevent someone from falsely signing some company up, as a joke or something. And then we make sure it's a US business, or they at least have a presence in the US, and it's a for-profit business. We've had to turn away a few nonprofits and educational institutions because we really want to keep this in the business to business lane. What we've learned with getting into this space is that the get out the vote realm is quite crowded, and there's a lot of groups working on this. And we want to keep Time to Vote very much in its business to business lane, and really keep it a niche program, and try not to venture outside of that, because then we start stepping on other people's toes. But yeah, you send in the form, and it takes us only a couple of days, and then most people get approved, and then you're in the system, and you're uploaded to the website, your logo goes on there, and then you start getting our communication, which is pretty much monthly. We send out a little email with some updates.
Okay, good. So there are a number of questions here that people have noted in the chat. So let me ask one of those. And Atlanta, it's specifically to you, but I think it's relevant for any company, about how your participation in Time to Vote, and maybe similar initiatives where you have a public facing statement or approach, how does that affect your brand and reputation?
Well, we certainly do consumer insights work, but we haven't directly corroborated participation in Time to Vote and any kind of bump in reputation. So I don't have that information, but what we do know is that consumers want to buy from brands that they trust. They value brands that have a sense of authenticity and integrity. And for us, I feel like Time to Vote and just all the work we do around climate and tree planting and, you know, environmentally responsible product and all the community work we do, all of these things kind of lend in to that sense of authenticity, the proof points that people can find online about who we are as a brand that would hopefully would engender that sense of trust. So we don't have the research that directly sort of links Time to Vote with that, but I feel it's all part of a bigger picture that consumers can take in, and, you know, different parts will, different elements of what we do in the community will resonate with different consumers. And I think it's all part of building that reputation as a active brand who cares and takes a stand on issues that are important to them.
Right. Good. Rebecca, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I would mirror what Atlanta said.
Okay.
We don't actually say much to our customers about what we've been doing with Time to Vote. Maybe we should. It's been more of an internal process and encouraging our employees, and something that we maybe speak to other businesses about locally. But I would definitely agree that all the things that we do as a business blend together in creating who we are as a brand, and that's something that's compelling to our customers.
Okay. Great.
Richard,
Yes,
can I
please.
jump in just quickly on that? We did a report after the 2018 midterms about Time to Vote, and we looked specifically at the media coverage and the tone of the media coverage around Time to Vote, and there were more than 600 news articles written about Time to Vote. They mentioned a variety of companies, and all of the articles were either neutral or slightly positive in tone toward Time to Vote and the companies involved.
Right. Okay. Good. You know, something that I hear often in the work we're doing in Business for America is, you know, we think it's important to encourage one's employees to vote, and we think vote by mail is also important, but our company doesn't want to get into politics. You know, we just, you know, we just don't do that. So how would any of you respond to that skepticism that, you know, being involved in Time to Vote in particular is somehow a endorsement of a political candidate, or somehow showing your cards and, you know, and immediately becomes a partisan effort?
Well, I could speak to that.
Yeah, please.
So Badger's absolutely a nonpartisan company, but as a mission-driven company, we absolutely have values, and it's hard to separate the fact that you have values from the political system that's out there, because that's going to have an impact on whether we're able to follow through on our mission. And so our participation in Time to Vote is less about trying to support one candidate than it is trying to support the democratic system and giving our employees every opportunity to cast their vote. Maybe it's in part because we believe everyone should vote or have the opportunity to vote, and maybe it's in part because we respect and value our employees and we want them to have every opportunity to have their voice. Either way, it's not designed to be partisan, and we don't see it as getting into politics. It's really supporting democracy.
Okay. Yeah. Atlanta or Kate, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I would say it's actually empowering for employees to feel they have information, to feel they have access to the candidates. You know, the vast number of messages I get, because I generally coordinate and communicate the different initiatives or information or the candidate visits or whatever, obviously in very close collaboration with HR, as Rebecca and Kate mentioned. But yeah, the feedback we get is that it's empowering. Thank you for bringing these candidates to us. I want to be more informed. Thank you for sending me this resource. You know, people, it's a very positive experience for the employees to feel like their company is just offering them information, and we make very clear that it's nonpartisan and you can find out information about any candidates, and we invite both sides. We can't control who shows up, and in general, you know, the employees appreciate it and appreciate just having the time to vote. you know? So it's not, for me, when you say that, it doesn't, obviously it's about politics and the political process, but to me, we think of it more and we communicate it more as the democratic process, right? That we're inviting you, you know, that the voting is a gift, and we invite you to share your voice, and we're going to do everything we can to empower you to do that.
Right.
And so we've had no negative pushback.
Great. Yeah, and it's very similar to how Business for America looks at this issue, because we feel that, you know, wide-scale participation strengthens our democracy. And, you know, we appreciate that we live in a polarized and somewhat hyper-partisan political ecosystem these days. And we're encouraging companies to help sort of restructure the way politics works. And some of the non-time to vote work we're involved in is on issues like open primaries and ranked choice voting, fair districting, and we feel that those initiatives help to strengthen the process, reduce polarization, and, you know, make the entire democratic political system more functional. Because without that, I think you'd all agree, it becomes difficult to do business. Let me pose another question here. This is an interesting one, comes from Mike Mackinick with White Mountain Strategies, and he wonders whether any of you incorporate political activism or social responsibility into your hiring process. And if so, what does that look like? So it sounds like, you know, you might have some filter that you'd use to determine who gets a job in the company. Anyone want to comment on that?
I mean, we don't really get into that with, you know, potential candidates, but we do talk about our commitment to social responsibility, our commitment to service, how they will receive 40 paid hours of service. So that definitely factors into the conversation. And in fact, questions about the service benefit or the path of service program, which is what we call it, is like the #1 asked questions in interviews. So we're definitely looking for people who have a passion for mission-driven business. But I'd say that's sort of as far as the screening goes, you know.
Yeah, I would say that we do something similar in that we do what we call mission-based hiring. We don't require that new employees agree with everything that we do, but we want them to be aligned in the fact that we're a mission-based company, that we have social and environmental goals and vision. And so we hope that new employees are on board for being part of a mission-driven company, but we don't prescribe what kind of political views they have or whether they agree with every single point on our mission.
And for the most part, we find that candidates really, that's something that they really like about Timberland, right? That we are a mission-based business, and that there are opportunities for them to engage in that in a variety of ways.
There are a few questions about the election coming up, about swing states, about vote by mail, and how companies might play a role. So let me frame the question this way. You know, as all of you, I think, are aware, and as we've seen in recent primaries, because of the COVID crisis, because of historic underfunding of election systems, that there's likely to be some real challenges come November in terms of how people vote, the safety of voting, where they'll vote, because a number of the traditional facilities will likely be closed. And there's a large scale movement to have more people vote by mail in order not to jeopardize anybody's health when they have to go to a polling place. So Business for America and all the companies on this call are working on something called Operation Vote Safe, which seeks to mobilize the private sector to help state and local election officials run their elections in a safe, secure, and credible way. Because what we're committed to is making sure that the results, whatever they are, come November, are credible and that people see them as legitimate. So JJ, if I could turn to you for a moment, and you know, we've been working actively on this vote by mail initiative, which the Wall Street Journal wrote an article about last week, which was great. And I wonder if you could say anything about Operation Vote Safe, your thinking on vote by mail, and how other companies can get involved in that initiative.
The first thing we've done is we sent our letter to Congress, to the Big Four, asking for $3.6 billion in federal money to help, excuse me, states execute expanded mail-in voting and early voting for this November's election. We don't know if that funding is going to come through, but we're still, as you know, Richard, we're still pursuing that and asking our leaders to allocate that funding. I believe I saw an email from Bonk this morning. I think 140 companies have signed on to that letter. People can still sign on to that letter. We are seeing some press interest around that, and we're seeing that it seems like it's becoming more bipartisan. We're seeing support from Republicans and Democrats for that, but that is a very steep hill to climb. Whether or not that funding comes through, we'll find out probably, I'm guessing, in a month or so. Regardless of the funding, there's going to be a number of ways that private companies can help with the Vote Safe campaign. Like Kate mentioned earlier, Seventh Generation is looking at donating sanitization products to polling precincts. Patagonia is looking into whether we can donate face masks to polling precincts. And I asked my product team, which they're making face masks themselves, and they're sourcing them from factories. So we're looking into how many masks we could have available by November and whether we can provide those to polling precincts. We're looking into whether we legally can pay for postage for employees to mail in their ballots. And then we're looking into how we can activate our workforce. You know, we have thousands of young, healthy people here in the United States who work for Patagonia who are going to have a paid day off on election day. So we're looking into getting them to become poll volunteers either on election day or before election day, because the polling precincts are going to be inundated with mail-in ballots. A lot of states already have mail-in voting, and we're going to see a surge in mail voting this fall, and they're going to need help collecting all those ballots and processing them. And a lot of the poll workers that we all have seen tend to be a bit older and might be more susceptible to contracting coronavirus and having some health complications, and therefore need to stay home. And we're looking at how we can supplement those people who need to stay home to protect their safety and provide our workforce to help there.
Right, good. And let me just amplify JJ's point. So again, Business for America, working with the companies on this webinar and many others, is creating a program called Operation Vote Safe. So if your company is interested in participating and contributing product or equipment or personnel or maybe technology to any election jurisdiction in the United States, we'd be happy to talk with you about that. We've been chatting with a number of secretaries of state and local election officials across the country and beginning to understand what resources they'll actually need. And then we'll work with individual companies to match up in what jurisdictions, in what states the companies can contribute. So, it's a huge country and we don't expect many companies to be able to participate in 50 states, but you can really pick and choose what states you might want to contribute, as JJ said, face mask or hand sanitizer or personnel. So that's a national, again, nonpartisan effort. And we look forward to working with any of you across, New Hampshire, Vermont that want to be part of that. There's another question here, and I see we're getting close to the top of the hour, but it's about vote by mail practices. And there are now 5 states in the country, actually 6, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, Utah, Hawaii, and California, where the entire election in November will be conducted through the mail. So people will not be going to a physical polling place. So the question is, why, let me rephrase this question, why does your company think that vote by mail is a smart strategy, is an effective way to conduct the election? Do any of you want to answer that question? Kate, is that something you'd like to say?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on that.
Please.
I mean, I will reiterate what folks have already said here, which is that this is unprecedented times to be holding an election. And we know that there are a lot of folks who are at high risk for contracting COVID-19. And so on a very basic level, I think it comes from a firm belief that vote by mail, extended early voting, these are all ways to just reduce the amount of crowding that's happening on election day. Beyond that, there have also been pretty extensive studies that have been done in the states that have already adopted universal vote by mail, or where their primary voting method is by mail. And it's also shown that not only is voter fraud virtually non-existent, but it also has a really significant impact on voter turnout rates. So this is a method of voting that is not only incredibly secure, it strengthens our democracy and our civic society overall by facilitating greater participation in the political process. And in a moment when we know now and can't, without a crystal ball, can't see into the future of what the fall is going to hold for us, I think it's safe to say that measures that we can start to put into place to reduce crowding in polling places on election day is going to be an important part of having a safe and secure election. And I know both JJ and Richard can also speak to some of the resources through the Brennan Center and some of the other organizations who have really compelling resources and recommended language to use if that's useful. So I'd really encourage folks to seek that out, because that the data is definitely there on vote by mail.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Kate. I see a note here from D. Fitzgerald from Badger that says New Hampshire approves letting anyone register to vote by mail if COVID-19 has them concerned or fearful about getting COVID-19. So I'll have to check that out. That's in the Union Leader, I think, this morning. But the big takeaway here is that more and more states are adjusting the way people will be voting come November. And each state, for better or worse, makes its own rules. So in some states, it's very easy to vote by mail or use an absentee ballot or no excuse balloting. In other cases and other places, it's quite a conundrum to figure out how to vote by mail. What our campaign is focused on is trying to support states making those changes in a sufficient amount of time so election officials can adapt. And then also, as JJ noted earlier, encouraging Congress to allocate funds to the states. So it's the top of the hour. I want to thank everybody so much for participating. Atlanta and Kate and Rebecca and JJ, thanks so much. Great stories. We are going to capture these great insights and look to develop sort of a best practices document sometime, ideally in the next few weeks, because I think there's a lot to be learned from how companies have been pursuing time to vote. And JJ, I'll leave the last comment to you, last thought, as one of the organizers of Time to Vote. Anything you'd like to leave us with?
Just thank you, Richard, and Business for America and everyone, all the other companies. Amazing to hear all their stories and just really refreshing. If you're one of the people listening to this, I think what you've probably seen today is this group of really activist companies, which is amazing, but you don't have to be like us. You could be more middle of the road or more right leaning, and Time to Vote is for everyone. We want everyone to join this, and it really hinges on the sole issue of voting and making time for your employees. to vote. If you are an activist company, that's great. We welcome you as well. But just know that this is open to everyone, and you don't have to be as vocal and aggressive as all of us are on this call. You can be kind of new to this, and that's totally fine. So thank you.
Great, good. Okay, good. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe, keep exercising, and we'll see you all soon, hopefully. Thanks.